Chapter 55 of Barnaby Rudge. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Barnaby Rudge by Charles Dickens. Chapter 55. John Willet, left alone in his dismantled bar, continued to sit staring about him, awake as to his eyes, certainly, but with all his powers of reason and reflection in a sound and dreamless sleep. He looked round upon the room which had been for years, and was, within an hour ago, the pride of his heart, and not a muscle of his face was moved. The night without looked black and cold through the dreary gaps in the casement. The precious liquids, now nearly leaked away, dripped with a hollow sound upon the floor. The Maypole peered ruefully in through the broken window, like the bowsprit of a wrecked ship. The ground might have been the bottom of the sea, it was so strewn with precious fragments. Currents of air rushed in, as the old doors jarred and creaked upon their hinges. The candles flickered and guttered down, and made long winding sheets. The cheery deep red curtains flapped and fluttered idly in the wind. Even the stout Dutch kegs, overthrown and lying empty in dark corners, seemed the mere husks of good fellows whose jollity had departed, and who could kindle with a friendly glow no more. John saw this desolation, and yet saw it not. He was perfectly contented to sit there staring at it, and felt no more indignation or discomfort in his bonds than if they had been robes of honour. So far as he was personally concerned, old Time lay snoring and the world stood still. Save for the dripping from the barrels, the rustling of such light fragments of destruction as the wind affected, and the dull creaking of the open doors, all was profoundly quiet. Indeed, these sounds, like the ticking of the death watch in the night, only made the silence they invaded deeper and more apparent. But quiet or noisy, it was all one to John. If a train of heavy artillery could have come up and commenced ball practice outside the window, it would have been all the same to him. He was a long way beyond surprise. A ghost couldn't have overtaken him. By and by he heard a footstep, a hurried and yet cautious footstep, coming on towards the house. It stopped, advanced again, then seemed to go quite round it. Having done that, it came beneath the window, and a head looked in. It was strongly relieved against the darkness outside by the glare of the guttering candles. A pale, worn, withered face, the eyes, but that was owing to its gaunt condition, unnaturally large and bright; the hair a grizzled black. It gave a searching glance all round the room, and a deep voice said, "Are you alone in this house?" John made no sign, though the question was repeated twice, and he heard it distinctly. After a moment's pause, the man got in at the window. John was not at all surprised at this either. There had been so much getting in and out of window in the course of the last hour or so that he had quite forgotten the door, and seemed to have lived among such exercises from infancy. The man wore a large, dark, faded cloak and a slouched hat. He walked up close to John and looked at him. John returned the compliment with interest. "How long have you been sitting thus?" said the man. John considered, but nothing came of it. "Which way have the party gone?" Some wandering speculations relative to the fashion of the stranger's boots got into Mr. Willet's mind by some accident or other, but they got out again in a hurry, and left him in his former state. "You would do well to speak," said the man. "You may keep a whole skin, though you have nothing else left that can be hurt. Which way have the party gone?" "That," said John, finding his voice all at once, and nodding with perfect good faith (he couldn't point, he was so tightly bound) in exactly the opposite direction to the right one. "You lie!" said the man angrily, and with a threatening gesture. "I came that way. You would betray me." It was so evident that John's imperturbability was not assumed, but was the result of the late proceedings under his roof, that the man stayed his hand in the very act of striking him, and turned away. John looked after him without so much as a twitch in a single nerve of his face. He seized a glass, and holding it under one of the little casks until a few drops were collected, drank them greedily off. Then, throwing it down upon the floor impatiently, he took the vessel in his hands and drained it into his throat. Some scraps of bread and meat were scattered about, and on these he fell next, eating them with voracity, and pausing every now and then to listen for some fancied noise outside. When he had refreshed himself in this manner with violent haste, and raised another barrel to his lips, he pulled his hat upon his brow as though he were about to leave the house, and turned to John. "Where are your servants?" Mr. Willet indistinctly remembered to have heard the rioters calling to them to throw the key of the room in which they were out of window for their keeping. He therefore replied, "Locked up." "Well for them if they remain quiet, and well for you if you do the like," said the man. "Now show me the way the party went." This time Mr. Willet indicated it correctly. The man was hurrying to the door when suddenly there came towards them on the wind the loud and rapid tolling of an alarm bell, and then a bright and vivid glare streamed up, which illumined not only the whole chamber, but all the country. It was not the sudden change from darkness to this dreadful light. It was not the sound of distant shrieks and shouts of triumph. It was not this dread invasion of the serenity and peace of night that drove the man back as though a thunderbolt had struck him. It was the bell. If the ghastliest shape the human mind has ever pictured in its wildest dreams had risen up before him, he could not have staggered backward from its touch as he did from the first sound of that loud iron voice. With eyes that started from his head, his limbs convulsed, his face most horrible to see, he raised one arm high up into the air, and holding something visionary back and down with his other hand, drove at it as though he held a knife and stabbed it to the heart. He clutched his hair and stopped his ears and travelled madly round and round, then gave a frightful cry and with it rushed away. Still, still, the bell tolled on and seemed to follow him, louder and louder, hotter and hotter yet. The glare grew brighter, the roar of voices deeper, the crash of heavy bodies falling shook the air. Bright streams of sparks rose up into the sky, but louder than them all, rising faster far to heaven, a million times more fierce and furious, pouring forth dreadful secrets after its long silence, speaking the language of the dead, the bell, the bell. What hunt of spectres could surpass that dread pursuit and flight? Had there been a legion of them on his track, he could have better borne it. They would have had a beginning and an end, but here all space was full. The one pursuing voice was everywhere. It sounded in the earth, the air, shook the long grass, and howled among the trembling trees. The echoes caught it up. The owls hooted as it flew upon the breeze. The nightingale was silent and hid herself among the thickest boughs. It seemed to goad and urge the angry fire and lash it into madness. Everything was steeped in one prevailing red. The glow was everywhere. Nature was drenched in blood. Still the remorseless crying of that awful voice, "The bell! The bell!" It ceased, but not in his ears. The knell was at his heart. No work of man had ever voice like that which sounded there and warned him that it cried unceasingly to heaven. Who could hear that bell and not know what it said? There was murder in its every note, cruel, relentless, savage murder, the murder of a confiding man, by one who held his every trust. Its ringing summoned phantoms from their graves. What face was that, in which a friendly smile changed to a look of half incredulous horror, which stiffened for a moment into one of pain, then changed again into an imploring glance at heaven, and so fell idly down with upturned eyes, like the dead stags he had often peeped at when a little child? Shrinking and shuddering, there was a dreadful thing to think of now, and clinging to an apron as he looked. He sank upon the ground, and grovelling down as if he would dig himself a place to hide in, covered his face and ears. But no, no, no! 100 walls and roofs of brass would not shut out that bell, for in it spoke the wrathful voice of God, and from that voice the whole wide universe could not afford a refuge. While he rushed up and down, not knowing where to turn, and while he lay crouching there, the work went briskly on indeed. When they left the Maypole, the rioters formed into a solid body, and advanced at a quick pace towards the Warren. Rumour of their approach having gone before, they found the garden doors fast closed, the windows made secure, and the house profoundly dark, not a light being visible in any portion of the building. After some fruitless ringing at the bells, and beating at the iron gates, they drew off a few paces to reconnoitre, and confer upon the course it would be best to take. Very little conference was needed, when all were bent upon one desperate purpose, infuriated with liquor, and flushed with successful riot. The word being given to surround the house, some climbed the gates, or dropped into the shallow trench and scaled the garden wall, while others pulled down the solid iron fence, and while they made a breach to enter by, made deadly weapons of the bars. The house being completely encircled, a small number of men were dispatched to break open a tool shed in the garden, and during their absence on this errand,